A part of growing up is the realization that life doesn't always go like you expected it to. Is there a single day that doesn't bring some kind of a surprise? There are definitely positive surprises, grace that you didn't expect nor earn, but there are also disappointments. Life is complicated, a mixed bag of blessings and suffering. Some get to hold on to their idyllic worldview longer than others. Some are forced to mature into suffering far too early. But eventually we all feel it. Things don't go like we plan. Everyone tastes of suffering and disappointment to some degree. When Genesis first introduces us to the character of Joseph, he has all of the wide-eyed optimism of his youth. He's his father's favorite. And he had a dream that one day his brothers would bow down and serve him. His optimism about the future spilled into almost every conversation, much of it to the frustration of his brothers. Eventually, those brothers had enough of it. They threw Joseph into a pit, formed a plan to fake his death, and then sold Joseph off into slavery. Joseph's vision of his brothers honoring him was shattered by the reality instead of their betrayal. Joseph was no longer naive to the world. He tasted what we all inevitably do: suffering, pain, and injustice. Joseph ended up a slave in Egypt, a long way from home and a long way from his expectations. From there, Joseph's story was a roller coaster of unexpected success and crushing disappointments. He climbed to positions of power, and he fell through false allegations and into a prison cell. Years went by, and his dreams about his family must have seemed as distant and impossible as returning to his optimistic youth. Those days had now long passed. Everything he had expected, every opportunity he had, every hope he had hoped for, now shattered before him. The story goes that by a series of miraculous occasions, Joseph finally found favor with Pharaoh and became one of Egypt's greatest leaders, second to only Pharaoh himself. One day, to Joseph's astonishment, his long-forgotten brothers came in and bowed before him, seeking help in the midst of a devastating famine. They didn't recognize Joseph. How could they? It had been years, and who could have imagined a story like this, from slave to ruler? The scene really is incredible. Joseph's youthful dreams had come true. Here were his brothers bowing before him just as he had seen it, but nothing about it had been predictable. Joseph's naivety suddenly gave way to a deep affection and humility. He had not fulfilled his dream. God had. And who could have seen how God would do it? Joseph invited the men into the palace for a meal and was finally overcome with emotion. Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. "But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. It was God who sent me here, not you." Don't be confused. It was Joseph's brothers who sold him into slavery. But from Joseph's perspective, it had been God who was working, even through his suffering and through their injustice. As Joseph would later put it, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good." Joseph's test of suffering and injustice is one we all inevitably face. You know what it is to be in the depths of sorrow and confusion. To be with Joseph in that dungeon, struggling to make sense out of your life and wondering how it came to this. Like Joseph, you know what it is to walk through this test with little more than faith holding you together. Joseph's story understands that complexity. All of the brokenness and injustice in this world, and all of the ways that it seeks to harm you, can be the very things that God uses to do something far more good than you could have ever imagined possible. Joseph's story threads an awesome question into the test of your suffering. What might God intend for your good? What might God be doing? Listen.